All right, everybody, welcome back to another Rebooting the Blue. Claire here again, and Chris, our LPC and NCC. Let's get in those letters, right? And we also have another guest. Chris, do you want to introduce our other guest here today?
This is my friend Jen. She's also LPC or almost there, I think, right, Jen? Jen has a background, did worked fire suppression, first responder type stuff, and then also has worked clinically for a number of years and is as close as I would say an expert to A&D treatment stuff therapeutically as I've ever worked with. Got a unique view on it. Whenever I have questions over the years regarding working with somebody that is experiencing some issues around alcohol or drugs or some of those coping mechanisms that just sort of get out of control, Jen's the one that I usually call. So uh, based on today's topic, I thought if I can get Jen to come in and talk a little bit about it, it'd be great. So here she is. Uh,
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jen, so much for joining us. So, just Chris mentioned there are a couple different terms. So, A&D, right? Alcohol and drug. So as we talk about this topic, that's, a very relevant topic to people in the first responder world. Our group that we're really focusing on specifically is folks working in law enforcement. And just, kind of a disclaimer, like we're not sitting here in judgment of the fact that these are coping mechanisms that people use. I mean, there's a reason that people use them. And so there's also a price, right? There's a cost to using alcohol and drugs. And so part of the conversation today, is just like understanding kind of why we might see that pattern in first responder law enforcement populations. And if folks are interested in making a change in that realm, what does it look like for them? So just to start things off, then, Jen, what are some reasons alcohol, drug use, may become a problem for someone, especially law enforcement? Why do we see it maybe more frequently? Do we see it more frequently in law enforcement and first responders?
Yeah, you definitely do. Those kind of positions, they have a lot of stress, very high stress environments, lots of conflict, lots of trauma exposure. These are all these positions. While these individuals are experiencing these things, they're having to stay in a very logical state of mind, right? These individuals don't get to run off of emotional responses, right? It's pretty much straightforward. This is what we need to do, dot dot dot. So it's a very logical state of mind. Because of that, when they get off duty and they're hanging out with friends or at home, they're going to want to emotionally let some steam off, right? And so, because of that, you're going to see people probably engaging in some of those coping mechanisms to help manage that. So, definitely, yeah, that's some of the bigger reasons why this population, engages in probably more alcohol or other use than maybe others.
Yeah.
I've also seen it too, interestingly enough, for sleep,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
right? Um,
Especially marijuana.
yeah, yeah. Or now the term I gummies, right? It's
Yep.
it's not like, yeah, but yeah, for sleep. And it's so interesting, right? They don't want to go and talk to their doctor about, hey, taking a sleep pill because those are bad, but right, a little bit of whiskey and then I can sleep. We know that ultimately it's not the kind of sleep you want, but yeah, I've seen that a lot for sleep.
Yeah, definitely disrupts sleeping actually. But yeah.
Yes, yes. So that's what I was going to ask about. So Jen, and Chris, my understanding is alcohol obviously it starts off as a depressant and then about
Mhm.
5-ish hours into being metabolized in the body actually turns into more of a stimulant. And so
Mhm.
utilizing alcohol for that initial sleepiness might, help you fall asleep, but it certainly doesn't help you get good quality sleep or stay asleep.
No. And not only that, but I mean, while your body is metabolizing all of that, it's working overtime, and so because of that, yeah, it's just not the kind of sleep you want, just like Chris had mentioned. So
Yeah. And
Well, if
another
you're a guy in your 50s like me, it equates to, yeah, I gotta go pee in 5 hours anyway, so it's not good sleep, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And another
How
thing
do you,
that Chris that
oh,
you mentioned was just around even talking to your doctor about it. So that's something I found like just even giving presentations or lecturing to law enforcement groups, a lot of people aren't aware that, I mean, they think of sleep support aids. I think they typically think of Ambien, right? Or these kind of more scary ones where like, oh, I could just go drive a car and not even know I'm driving. And so like utilizing a sleep aid seems really scary because obviously if you drove, under the influence, that would impact potentially put people and yourself in danger, but also impact potentially your employment. But there's other sleep supporting um, pharmacological options that don't necessarily have those types of side effects that people can access.
Hmm. For sure.
but again, I don't want to, want to pathologize. I mean, there's a reason, people can use alcohol very responsibly. It's a part of the culture, first responders, especially law enforcement. I mean, we drink when we're happy, we drink when we're sad, right? I mean, it's
Drink when you're
uh,
bored. Drink when
drink
you're
when you're bored.
yeah.
Oh, hear a lot of that ones too. My night shifters, right? What do I do on my nights off? I kind of wander around the house, when the kids and the spouse are in bed, and hey, have a few, while I'm
Mhm.
watching Netflix or playing video games, and then it kind of goes off too. But Santa, and this is the question I was really dying to ask you on this, Jen, is when do you see, because you worked in this field for quite a long time with it, what do you see when it goes from that, just kind of something we use and we use okay, right? Or if, I mean, I don't even know if that would be the right term, but it does turn into the problem or abuse, right? When it goes from use to abuse. I mean, what are you normally looking for when you're assessing for that?
Yeah, for sure. So, like you were saying, there are a lot of people who can use it reasonably. It's fine, and it's a part of when they want to have a good time, so on and so forth. I would say that it starts to become an issue when you realize that it's number one, become a part of a routine, right? So it's, now this is something that you're doing on a specific day, time. Maybe it's something you're doing every day. But when it kind of becomes something that's ingrained in your routine, it's no longer something you just do when you're out having fun with friends, or you're just kind of sitting back and relaxing one night after a long day. It's now ingrained in your daily routine, and so that can be one sign that it's maybe starting to become something that's a bit much. Another one is when you can't feel okay without it. When you can't enjoy time with people without having alcohol. If you can't have fun, or any of those things, you have to have alcohol in order to feel engaged with others, then that can also be another sign that it's maybe getting a little problematic. Another one is wanting to cut down but not able to. So, say you're saying to yourself, man, I feel like I've been drinking just way too much this week. Last week, I need to cut down, but you're finding that you can't, or all of a sudden you change your mind and you don't want to, and you just keep using. Maybe you end up using more or the same, but not being able to stop or cut down when you're wanting to. And then another one would be when it starts creating some difficulties in your relationships, when it starts creating issues maybe in the workplace. Maybe you drank way too much again last night, and now you're not getting up to your alarm clock and getting to work on time, or getting to your shift. Maybe, there are more arguments that are occurring because there's too much alcohol involved in the relationship, and, you're more distanced and disconnected. So those are some of the signs that I notice when it's starting to become probably more problematic versus just something that you do on occasion.
So if someone starts to notice that, Jen, I mean, what's something that they can consider? Like if they're like, oh, I'm noticing these things as she's listing it, this kind of sounds like me a little bit. What could they do about that if they notice that?
Well, um, you know, I think that the first step is probably reaching out for help, getting engaged with somebody who's either a CADC or even mental health. I would highly suggest maybe having someone who's dually certified, so someone who has both sides of it when it
What's a
comes to
CADC?
CADC is a certified alcohol and drug therapist, essentially, or counselor. Um, And so there's three different levels. You have a CADC 1, 2, and a 3. I'm currently a 2. 3 is the highest level that you can get. 1 is entry level CADC. So you can start there. Probably having discussions with your doctor. That's a really great way to start, maybe with the referral process, depending on how you want to go about that. I would have to say some of the things that you probably want to look at when it comes to, like, say you actually get engaged in therapy. There's some really good substance related directed therapies. One of them is called detour, or desensitization of triggers and urge reprocessing. Very similar to EMDR. It uses bilateral stimulation, which is a form of accessing both sides of the brain, right and left, at a simultaneous time, help people reprocess traumatic incidents or moments. It's just that this is more targeted towards urges and different triggers. It's great because it also combines CBT, solution focused, Ericksonian, narrative, object relations. All those things are actually kind of combined into it, which makes it wonderful for addressing substance use issues. And there's actually a whole entire array of things that could actually address. The other thing is ensuring you have a good support system at home, and that's not just having good friends and, family. You want to make sure that your support system isn't in the same current situation you are. So you don't want to be reaching out to your friend who's also currently drinking to, push down emotions or to avoid whatever issues are coming up. You want to reach out to somebody who's stable, who's able to be there for you without like alcohol involvement, if at all possible, or who's really reasonable with it. That can help kind of support you through that. A lot of times a spouse would be a good person for that if their mental health and everything else is at a good place. I would say another one would be changing routine, navigating downtime. So a lot of problems come about when you get bored, you don't have things to do. Just like Chris was saying, when you're doing night shift and you're walking around the house and, you're underoos with nothing else to do. Well, I mean, sometimes that seems like the thing you're going to point to. So filling in your time, finding things that you can do so you're not sitting around with those idle hands for too long. Another one is outside support groups. I know that getting into 12-step programs might be a little difficult in rural areas because you're going to end up running into people in the community, and there's this huge stigma around first responders and alcohol use and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of online options that take you out of that community and can actually get you some good support. One of those programs is actually called In the Rooms. And it's just specifically spelled like that. And it's probably one of the larger online substance use support groups that there is. So not the only one, but a very good one that's very open. It's open not just within the US, but it's all over the world. And it has groups that are going 24/7. So if you've got somebody who's on night shift, they can pop into a live group at any time. So that's a really good option for individuals. And then, of course, depending on how dire, the issue is, there's also inpatient. There are lots of wonderful inpatient programs all over that are just amazing at helping individuals overcome those initial steps with addiction and moving into recovery. So.
Yeah, and I've worked with some that are, well, in fact, they're really the only ones I've worked with, but inpatient that are specifically for first responders. Yeah, phenomenal success. Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned the detour as a treatment protocol. I've had real good success with that with first responders because it does seem to interweave really well. Well, I mean, it's an EMDR, that's the eye movement desensitization reprocessing modality that waste therapists use. But yeah, that detour, it's interesting because, right, it weaves in with sort of maybe the trauma basis, but also yeah, kind of working against those triggers for the use
Yeah.
really well. I've that you mentioned family, and this is the one that seems to be really interesting to me because. Again, in the world of addictions, right? Well, it's not a problem. She says it's a problem, and I've had a lot of those, right?
Yeah.
And I hate to make it sound like it's a he and she, but that's usually what I get, right? And they're sitting on my couch and like, I'm here because she thinks I need to come talk about my drinking, right? Um, what would you, because we work with peer teams a lot, and in fact, that's one of the basis of the whole program here that we've been supporting is the Mid-Columbia Peer Team. What would you, any resources or stuff you would say to family members, somebody that's, especially a first responder, struggling with the addiction issues?
Yeah. I mean, this is a difficult thing to work through, right? Not just for the individual who might be struggling with the use, but also the family that surrounds them, especially spouses. I would say, first things first, try to be as much of a positive support by being their stable person in their life as much as you can. There are certain groups that you can attend, especially for individuals that engage in alcohol or alcoholism. It's Al Anon. And so that one is specifically targeted for family members of alcoholics, which is a great support group. And I believe that you can find those online as well if you're not really wanting to go to a community Al Anon group in such our rural areas. Another one is set healthy boundaries. You've got to set those boundaries with your partner and you have to be consistent. Whatever those boundaries are, they're unique to each individual couple and each person. But make sure you're instilling those healthy boundaries. Those are so important, and making sure that you're doing them consistently. Know your limits as well, because you matter too, right? And so it's one of those things where you have to be able to know that you're not just a bystander in this, right? You also are somebody who matters within all those decisions and all that progress and everything else. The other thing is that progress in substance use, it's a slow roll sometimes. It's not an instant bam, there's changes right around the corner there. There's going to be lulls, there's going to be ups and downs. And so it's progress, not perfection. And so just being aware of that and being in it for that long haul. For some individuals, the alcohol is just abuse, right? So I didn't really talk about this in the beginning, but there's a difference between abusing something and then being dependent on something. So you can have someone who abuses alcohol, meaning, yeah, they use it almost every night, they're using it to cope, but also, they're not having withdrawals from it when they wake up in the morning, or they can stop for a couple of weekends because there's turmoil in the relationship and they can focus on relationship stuff. But then go right back to it when, emotional things come up, and then they, go back to abusing that again. Dependence is more centered around like, I can't wake up without having a beer. I can't function without drinking throughout the day. I've got to have, that fifth in the corner. It's where you start noticing health signs declining. You notice relationships around you crumbling. There's a big difference between the two. And I would say that a lot of our first responders are more around that abuse stage versus the actual dependence. Because once you get into that dependence route, it starts to become really difficult to manage your job, especially the kind of jobs that first responders have. And so because a lot of individuals will likely be in that abuse stage, there's so much more progress that you can make there. Just implementing the things I had talked about before, getting help early, getting support early, noticing those signs where you're like, oh, maybe this is starting to become a problem. And I think that when you have partners who want to support that change and want to be a part of that, it's amazing. So Yeah, that's what I would suggest for those spouses out there. Make sure you have support too.
You talk about treatment, and there's some medication stuff out there, right? I mean, what's your what's your experience about that, and how? Because I run into this, but any any thoughts or help for our people in having that conversation with their doctors?
Yeah. So there are medications like Antabuse. There's some other ones that are out there that are being used, I believe, off-label for alcohol use. But when it comes to medications, I mean, honestly, it depends on how far in you are, right? If you can't manage getting through the day without drinking, if you're waking up and needing something, medications may be your route, right? It's all about being completely honest with yourself and being like, all right, this is where I'm at, and then having that conversation. And like I said, you can start with, a co-occurring mental health therapist who also does CADC work, having those conversations with them first. Whatever helps you essentially kind of work into that. But you also have to remember medications aren't a solve all, right? They only last as long as you take them, and you can't take them forever. And so once you stop taking them, you're going to have to deal with the reasons why you were using alcohol or any other substances in the first place. We have to remember first and foremost that substance use is a symptom, right? It's a symptom of something that's underlying, whether that be trauma, stress, whatever it is, that needs to be addressed. So if you are going to use medications, I would highly suggest getting a start on working on those underlying mental health things while you're doing that, and get that kind of that leg up. So then that way, when you don't have it anymore, you can work through things in a healthier way, especially when those urges and stuff come back. So, yeah.
What do you think about? I got you now. I'm going to ask you all kinds of questions. Cessation versus harm reduction, especially in these populations.
So honestly, it depends on
And we
where
might need
you're
to define that, because all of a sudden I'm turning
at.
this into
Yeah,
nerd therapy talk. So
cessation, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
you're looking at no more alcohol ever
Cessation, right?
versus, right, versus just reducing how much you drink, or maybe taking a break from drinking, and then, re-engaging at a smaller amount. Um, I would say that like I had mentioned before, uh, a big portion of this population are still engaged in more of that abuse stage, right? And so we can still look at harm reduction. We can still look at, let's just try to take a break from this. Let's address why we're drinking too much in the first place. And then now you can regain maybe drinking at your leisure, when you're out socializing, whatever, but it's not attached to some sort of coping mechanism. It's not attached to how you're dealing with things. Once you can separate those two, then I would say have at it, right? Just make sure you're careful, but there's no reason why you can't re-engage. Those that are dependent on alcohol, it's kind of showing that one is not enough, and being able to actually stop yourself and not continue on until you're completely intoxicated. That's the lack of control and the inability to manage it. And for individuals that are in that area, that are at that stage, I would say probably sustaining an abstinence would probably be your best bet, because as soon as you re-engage back in it, you're going to be rolling down the same hill.
So it's as I think about like folks who might be listening to this, right? It sounds like if they're recognizing some of these signs and symptoms in themselves, they can absolutely get help through different avenues. And it's also not necessarily, it's not a career ender, right? Is that what I'm hearing? Like, this is something that people can get help with
Oh,
and
yeah.
absolutely continue working in law enforcement.
Oh, for sure. Most definitely. And if you're I know that sometimes engaging with mental health or even A&D, right, that can be a bit scary, because you don't want to have that label on yourself. Like, I have a problem. Now I can't be responsible, or I can't help the public, or, whatever it might be. But that's just simply not true, right? So when it comes to engaging in A&D, there's this HIPAA Privacy 42 CFR, which does not allow anybody to know about your treatment. And so that's completely confidential in every which way. When you engage in mental health, you can have that discussion with your mental health therapist, right? Like whatever underlining things that are happening, you can have that talk of like, hey, I want to make sure that this is not something that's going to come out into like come back to where I'm working. Can you make sure that when you write a note for like return to work or whatever, that you make it very concise and just very limited? And we can definitely do that. We can make this as privacy confidential as much as possible for that individual, so they don't have to worry about getting any kind of labels or having to worry about any of those things. So yeah, that's no reason why they can't go back to work. So
It's great to hear. And it sounds like maybe for some folks, if they're taking a break from work, is that maybe more folks who need to access the inpatient support or heavy outpatient support services, whereas some folks might be able to access that kind of like one-on-one
yeah.
therapeutic visit and just continue working their typical shift.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's different forms of treatment. I guess I could have mentioned this earlier. I say the word a lot, and I just realized that. So you can access outpatient. Outpatient is essentially anywhere from 1 to 9 hours a week of treatment. Okay, so that individual can just come in for individual therapy. They can engage in groups if they would like to. It just depends on what is arranged with their CADC or their counselor, drug and alcohol counselor, and what their needs are. Then you have intensive outpatient or IOP. IOP is usually anywhere from 10 or 9+ hours per week. And so that is going to be where they have to engage in specific groups, and they have to have individual sessions, usually on a weekly basis. And then what you have is inpatient services, where they actually go to a facility and then they engage there. A lot of the programs are anywhere from 30, 60, 90 days. Some of them can be even longer, just depending on what the needs are of the person.
Okay, so a variety of service options depending on their needs. And so let's say someone's listening and they're like, oh, I fit one of those categories in some way, or some of those things kind of sound like me, but I don't have the time for it. Is this something that's going to magically improve on their own, on its own without support?
Well, I think it just kind of depends on the person. And it depends on the stage that they're in with all this, right? So if you've got somebody who's just starting to see some of these signs and they decide, oh, I need to make a change, and they're able to do that on their own, that's wonderful. But you have some individuals that aren't able to make that change. They've, been engaging in relationship stress for months, haven't been able to change their habit. They've been having issues with sleeping for months and haven't been able to reduce the drinking. And so there's, different ways to look at that. Once again, being completely honest with yourself, which can be hard to do sometimes, easier said than done. But it really is just the matter of where somebody's at. You got to meet yourself where you are. And so if, you're realizing that you can't wake up in the morning without downing a beer, then you're going to need help. You're not going to be able to just be like, oh yeah, no, I'll take care of it. No, it's no, a little too far. So, yeah.
And there's again, even the intensive outpatient, the IOP, it's been some great strides in being able to deliver it virtually for several. And actually now, just in the last like 6 months, there's a virtual intensive outpatient program that is for just first responders, but different subsets too of their groups, just law enforcement. Yeah, we have access referrals for that through this program. I can give that to you, maybe put it in the notes. Yeah, so there's a lot of support, and also where we work in the realm of peer teams, what I've seen, and I don't know, Jen, what you think about this, but in addiction, in areas around addiction, man, peers can be amazing, right?
Mhm.
And I've seen people do unbelievable recovery with a really good, strong peer accountability and some, good outpatient therapy.
Yeah, for sure. A peer would be just like relevant to a sponsor in a 12-step program. Peers are amazing. Actually, they do a lot of that groundwork when it comes to supporting individuals with substance use issues. Like, I mean, peers are invaluable during, these processes. Like I said before, that's that support that's stable and, you know, representing what you're wanting to work towards, right? In terms of, okay, this is where I want to be at when it comes to my drinking. I want to be able to just dot, dot, dot. And it also, depends on your goals, right? Not everybody, like we said, wants to stop drinking or what have you. So it depends on what that specific individual's goals are and how they want to access those. You can have somebody who ends up just wanting to work with a peer um, and just maybe attending some mental health every other week. Like, it just depends on where they're at.
And this probably dates me a little bit as the dinosaur, but I keep talking about drinking. But to be honest, and I think there's some numbers coming out showing that people are engaging in alcohol actually less and less. Um, but we mentioned early on the marijuana for sleep. That's one that I'm seeing go up, and
Mhm.
first responders, right? As that, and what's interesting, that I've seen is, and having these conversations. I don't know if you are too, Jim, but like, there's this idea that, well, it's not as bad. And again, I'm not here to pathologize anything, but also you need to understand, and this is something I'm having with some clients, right? Is um, the potency of today's THC products is super, super high, right? I think it's grabbing
Yes.
a little bit, right? Yeah.
Actually, I believe you and I, Chris, were just having this discussion the other day. Um, you know, there's this common thought around marijuana is natural, and so it's not gonna harm you. It's natural, occurs in the environment. My response is, so are poppies, and then we got opium, then we got heroin, now we got fentanyl. So, the whole natural thing isn't always necessarily better. So, with marijuana, I mean, we're looking at potency levels up to anywhere from 85% all the way up to 98%, depending on what you're using. You're using oils and dabs, you're all the way up into that 98 range. Um, a lot of the studies, long term studies that have been conducted on marijuana, those were conducted back in the 70s and 80s when marijuana was maybe 5-7% THC content. We don't have long term studies on the effects of THC when it's 98%. Like, that's just not out there. And so individuals don't really understand what it's actually doing to your body over time. And especially if you're using it every day, multiple times a day. Um, Now, I'll go back to that idea of using it for sleep. Yes, a lot of individuals will use marijuana for sleep, but a lot of individuals use marijuana to help cope with anger, to help cope with anxiety, to help cope with all kinds of different regulation of emotions. Um, and that's unfortunate because it actually, in the long term, makes those things worse. It actually makes your sleep patterns worse the more that you use marijuana over time. Um, there I am saying again. Anyway, so just being careful on the usage of marijuana. And not only that, but there's a lot of places of work that have very unclear rules and regulations around marijuana use. And so, you want to make sure that you look up those policies and really read through the fine detail and make sure that you're not going to get in trouble for using it. Because if you're using marijuana, especially on a daily basis, and you're using anywhere from 85 to 98% THC content, it's going to take months for that to get out of your system. Unlike, using a gummy every other night or a couple of times a week for sleep. That runs through your system, goes through your digestive systems, usually out within the week. So yeah, it just kind of depends, I guess.
So, as we kind of wrap up here, Chris and Jen, is there anything that, as you think about just like covering this topic in general, specific to law enforcement, is there anything that we haven't brought up or we haven't touched on um, that is just like burning in your mind? I hope we mention this to them or anything like that.
No, but I think it's interesting that we're talking about this topic now after we just did one on suicide, and I realized as I was just sitting here and you asked this question, um, this is probably, I mean, next to the discussion about suicide, alcohol, drug, coping mechanism. I mean, because it's could be alcohol, it could be marijuana or pill. I've dealt with, around this, and it's another conversation that gets sort of that stigma around it that we can't have sometimes because we feel like, oh, or you can't, hey, Chris is known to go out and have a drink. Well, so how can we, right? I mean, we start to feel judged. We start to judge. It's like around issues of intimacy, whatever influences our views. It could be everything from our past history, right, to our education, to our current experience, to, religious views, right? Anything that is like this. So I think, again, just being able to have the conversation, and as Jim was saying, I mean, being able to look at your relationship with yourself too, right? And pay attention and see where it goes.
Yeah, another little tidbit on that when you were just discussing suicide. So, suicide, alcohol use greatly increases follow through with those types of things. And so, if you're an individual who's feeling like when you start drinking, you start having those thoughts, definitely be wary of that because alcohol reduces inhibitions, right? It gives you the efforts, and you tend to do more things while you're drinking than you normally would when you're sober. And so, just being careful of alcohol, any other substance use, being kind of a catalyst for those kinds of things. So.
Really something important to keep in mind. So, Jen, and thank you so much for coming today. Chris, of course, it's always wonderful to have you. You let me talk your ear off all the
I'm
time.
always hanging around.
Jen, it's so great to have you as a guest. Hopefully, we can have you back again in the future. And just thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, expertise. It's a really important topic for this population. And it sounds like there are a lot of resources that they can access and continue to do their job and, be well with themselves and figure out their relationship with alcohol and drugs and how to manage those things in a way that supports a healthy lifestyle and well-being in their relationships and with themselves. So thank you so much for that. And we'll sign off. Thanks all.
Right. Bye.